the range and diversity of your work? We typically start with the easy thing, which is talk about your... Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of She Dreams in Color video series, where we talk to women about their obstacle and their occupation. And today we are joined by Sophie Keatsman, who actually lives in New York City, but has so many connections to Charlotte. We were very grateful Sophie agreed to be here with us today to talk about their occupation as a diversity photographer and their personal obstacle, which we'll get into a little bit later. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. We love hosting people in our studio and having them, especially when they have a different job, to talk about and expose our audience to, because that's what it's all about, exposing people to different stories.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. So diversity photographer, I love to just jump into the occupation. I feel like a lot of our viewers and listeners want to know what kind of jobs are women doing, what kind of jobs are out there, what could I look into doing. So talk to me about what your job is.
Well, like you said, I'm a photographer. I have a degree in photography, and then after I graduated college, I moved to New York City to be a freelance photographer, and I work mainly in like fashion and beauty, and I do a lot of portraits for my like personal portfolio, and with the title being diversity photographer, for the sake of this, it's basically just photographing a lot of people that I think are visually underrepresented, and that's where the portraiture comes in a lot.
Mm-hmm. So going back to college for photography,
Yeah.
I feel really foolish saying this. I did not know there was a photography degree. Okay, so how did you even know that? And this is one of the reasons I love what we do here, because I feel like growing up I didn't know the options.
Me neither.
Teacher, nurse, librarian. So take me back to how you found this journey and how you found this opportunity.
So when I started studying photography, that was a fairly new concept that you could get a bachelor's degree specifically in photography, especially back then in Germany. It was more of like a, I don't even know what the term for it is, but more like a craftsmanship. And I think when I graduated high school, there was exactly 3 universities in all of Germany where you could get a bachelor's degree in photography. Most of the time it would be like communication design with a focus on photography. But I was lucky enough to get a spot at one of them. And it's, for me, I think the largest difference was that you really learn how to conceptualize your art, and you learn a lot of cultural, historic references, and the ethics and the moralities in being a visual creator, because it's such a unique decision-making process, and you learn to kind of have a critical perspective on why you make the decisions that you do and what kind of impact that can have on the people that are going to see your art. So it kind of, it shook us loose in our artistry and made us critical thinkers, I think.
Okay, I always have so much to unpack. I want to talk about your education more, but I want to go back to, you said that you went to college in Germany. You went to high school in Germany. So you were born overseas? You're not from America?
Yeah, in Germany.
Okay, all right. Tell me about that.
So I was born in Berlin, and then when I was 11, my family and we moved to Brussels in Belgium, and we lived there for 4 years. So that was kind of the first time that I got uprooted in my life, and I didn't speak any English when we moved to Brussels. I went to an all English speaking school, which was really tough in the beginning, but the school had a really good English as a second language program, because Brussels is the headquarters of the UN, so there's a lot of kids that needed to pick up English really quickly. And I think because I was so young, you just you get thrown in the pool and you just kind of adapt really quickly. So now it's like my second mother tongue. I don't have to think about it. I'll dream in English just as much as in German and stuff. And then moved back from Brussels to Berlin when I was 15, and then moved here, moved to New York City 5 years ago. So I think because I moved so early on in life, after that, it wasn't as scary anymore.
Oh, wow. I love hearing, you chose the word uprooted, which when you're that age and you're going to a foreign place, a new place, so different, it really is being uprooted. But I really love when something that can be detrimental and traumatic turns into a beautiful ingredient in your recipe.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I also imagine hearing your story, trying to connect it to what you do and why. I always want to know the why of how you got to that place. I'm sure a lot of folks don't look at you and assume you have an immigrant story because of how you look. They make that assumption, but that comes with its own set of journey and obstacles and feeling out of place and not feeling seen and not feeling like you belong, right?
Well, to me, actually, moving to the United States was a big part of feeling like I belonged, which is interesting. It certainly wasn't as much of a culture shock because of, like you said, having been uprooted early on in life. I think for me, it was more of, it's really a gift, actually, because I was raised by an older German generation, and even though Berlin in and of itself is such a liberal city, you know, everybody here, my friends are always like, I want to go to Berlin. Growing up there, I was certainly raised to be a certain way, under certain expectations, and, you know, a really strong, like, historic impact on families coming out of Second World War and stuff. And I think I definitely grew up having extreme expectations as to who I should be as a female. And when I first came to New York City, it was the first time in my life where I felt like that dropped away. And New York City was such a crazy place where I felt like I got to kind of start from zero. And it was the first time in my life where I asked myself, who do I want to be? So it wasn't scary. It was liberating, you know?
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Okay, let's trail back to your degree, and then we'll come back to New York City. So with your degree, I think it's really fascinating. I've never put studying photography the way you described it, which is like studying historical art. I've never put that together, those industries in that same dialogue, which is fascinating that I had not done that, because as a videographer, I push so hard for people to recognize I'm a creative.
Yeah.
I'm a creator. I use an electronic device to do that. But just like a painter uses a blank canvas, I'm starting with nothing also, and I can envision that art. So we see so many people become photographers, a point and shoot, and that is in its realm. But you have such a deep knowledge and appreciation for the craft that goes beyond what a lot of people have experienced. Did that make you fall so much more in love with it?
Yes, I mean, for sure. It actually, for me, it's rooted deeper than that, because my dad was a photographer as well. Actually, a lot of family members, even my grandfather's generation, were really, really great photographers. Yesterday I was going through an archive that my dad had digitalized from like 1970s and stuff like that, and like the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I have my dad like hacking away at the wall on photo and stuff. And then photography kind of opened me up to explore the field more critically and academically, obviously, which I think now gives me a good language to communicate to other creatives, you know, because I work in the fashion industry, so there's all different kinds of creative positions on set, and all collectively speaking one conceptual language is so helpful to create something new and develop a new visual language.
As you say that your lineage had photography in their background, you said your dad and your grandfather. Was the paradigm there that you as a girl would not be a photographer, or was that a vocation, or would it be a hobby? How was that accepted?
It was never really a big question. I was an only child, so the camera was kind of my way of finding purpose in being alone a lot of times, or just, you know, always being in the company of adults, and photography being the adult thing then became my thing. So I don't think anybody ever questioned it, because it was like the red thread and the way that I learned to entertain myself. And then I think later on I learned to express myself and reflect back how I perceived myself in my world. Like I always say, photography gave me this neutral ground to be whoever I wanted to be without a lot of the outside expectations, because when I had a camera in hand, then I was in control of the, you know, the communication that I was having with the person that I was photographing. And I think later on now in life, I can recognize that it stripped me bare of some of the boxes that I was already being raised into, even when I was really little. Like, I picked up a camera when I was 7, and it immediately had that effect on me of like purpose and freedom of expression. It hasn't changed yet, so stay tuned.
I love that. And one of the biggest indicators of who we invite to be on the interview series is someone called into their profession. We really want to show people you can do something you're called to do that you love to do, and you can thrive and be successful. And that is so much more valuable than clocking in and doing a task, because it comes with this depth of purpose and vision and translation even of why you were called to do that is like the thing the world needs. So as you described your journey in the academic side of it, I wonder if did the lack of what you saw in your academic research show you the opportunity, or the gap, I should say the gap, in what you do now?
It actually came a little bit later. I really only started recognizing how much of a lack in diversity there was in my own field after moving to New York City, and after personally also coming out as queer and coming out as non-binary, because that was a large part of my own identity I didn't have access to before I moved to the United States, actually. I grew up very, I guess you could say, like, boxed in with very high expectations of who I could be, and I lived that out for a long part of my life. I bought into that, I perpetuated it, and I kind of, turned myself into a certain version of my identity, and it took getting away from all the people that kind of felt like they knew who I was in order to, like, flip that for myself. And when I stopped pretending to be somebody I wasn't, was when I finally gained access to something that felt a lot more sustainable. And then I could take a step away and kind of look at, well, why was I so detached from that for so long in my life? Why didn't I have access to that? Why didn't I realize it? Like, literally didn't realize it, because it had never been an option to me, even from very, very little on. And me being a visual creator, like, I was 15 and I had 2 ginormous walls in my bedroom plastered with beauty and fashion photography, like the world's most famous fashion imagery at that time. And when I think about it now, none of the people on my wall I would have identified with. And even though there was like no, it wasn't that there wasn't any representation at all, it was such a small percentage that it just, up until I was 22, there wasn't a moment where I gained access to it in a way where it like clicked and I saw myself. So, you know, you're like blind to yourself in a way.
And it feels like such a controversial nurture nature discussion. I don't know a better way to describe it, but you see a lot of rhetoric that says New York contaminated you, New York changed you, New York influenced you, people living a certain kind of way created what you became. Instead of what you're saying, what I've experienced, what so many people say, is that they lived what they thought they were supposed to live, what they saw to live. And when they finally found someone who looked like them, acted like them, created a safe space for them to express who they are, that's when the real them came out.
Yeah.
But how do we communicate that? It's actually a lot of people who are against this journey have it backwards. I'm looking for, like, how do we say, no, you finally were a free-range chicken, you know? And you're like, wow, I actually like bugs and grass.
You realized you were a chicken for the first time in your life.
I've been over here in the dark eating grain, you know? But that is truly how it feels when you're literally free and safe, and finding other people for me, the thing that has just been so empowering is seeing other people be brave. I'm like, Jen, you got to step up. You can be brave. You can be more yourself. You can reveal more. You can share more. You can be more out about all of the different things that have been so suppressed because of the structures.
Right. Well, to your question about like the people that think that the outside influences turn you into a certain type of identity, I don't know if I have a strong enough argument to convince somebody that, you know, I was born gay. I don't know how to explain that to somebody, but I know how to explain to somebody what that felt like, that shift in my life, right? So I moved to New York City and I was surrounded by queer women for the first time in my entire life. I had a friend at the time who had just broken up with her boyfriend and then started dating women. And somewhat around the same time, I had a girl from my past that I was like acquainted with sort of like directly tell me the way she felt about me. That was the first time that happened to me in my life, where somebody that I also had feelings for like reciprocated them directly. And those two things happened really close back to back in my life. And I had just moved away from everything I had grown up with, and I was completely alone in a new country. And there was nobody around me that knew who I had been up until that point in my life. And all of a sudden, it like clicked, and I recognized why certain parts of my life up until that point had been so incredibly hard for me. Certain parts of my life, for example, the relationships that I was in up until that point in Germany never felt sustainable. Like I couldn't necessarily say this is what's wrong with it, but I always felt like this is not sustainable in a sense that like I never fantasized about marriage. I never fantasized about the family I would raise with these partners because something inside me just knew that picturing that at 40, 50, 60 didn't make sense somehow. And we don't have to get into the more traumatic aspects of those relationships. But then when I was in New York and I realized when this girl I knew that I had feelings for told me how she felt about me, I realized like, oh my God, Sophie, you fall in love with women. You have your entire life, but you have piled so much stuff on top of that and on top of the shame that was attached to that subconsciously that you could have, sorry to be graphic, but you could have put a gun to my head and asked me, Sophie, are you gay? I would have said no and believed it. And that split second in my life, it was like that whole house of cards of who I had to be in order to feel like I would still belong to the people around me and the society around me, it like collapsed, because for the first time I was replacing it with a part of my identity that felt so true that all of the other stuff all of a sudden couldn't compare anymore. It's like you all of a sudden flip on the color film from a black and white life, you know, and it like the stuff in it in the beginning is crazy. It felt like a huge goodbye, you know, like I was saying goodbye to all of what I had believed to be true in my life up until that point. But the stuff that came afterwards, it like the stuff that came flooding in, that felt sustainable for the first time in my entire life. It felt like something that was undoubtedly true, and I didn't question it for a split second. Like when I finally allowed myself to like look myself in the mirror and be like, there you are, then I didn't have to be in a relationship with a woman or do anything in order to know that that was true, because it was a feeling, you know. And I don't know if that would convince somebody that might not believe in that if they haven't gone through it themselves. But if you ask anybody from my community, they'll be like, mm-hmm.
And it's definitely something that comes in time and time again. You know, I've always known, I just didn't know. So I appreciate you being open about it and sharing, because it seems as if you're long enough in the journey, you've done the testing in the lab and you got it. Yeah. You're like, this is it.
I'm still testing it out myself too, I think. I talked to a lot of my non-binary friends, and we have this discussion where for ourselves, amongst our community, amongst the people that get it, where it's kind of a no-brainer, also that are a little bit more involved in using gender affirming language, it has never felt wrong. It has never been something we questioned. It has been something that every time we hear somebody refer to us that way or talk to us about that, about us that way, it just feels right. It speaks to our inner child. It doesn't speak to a box that we have experienced in the progression of our life. But then when you take us out of that setting, there's so much questioning that still goes on inside of us because you feel like for the first time you're taking up space that wasn't there before in society amongst people that might not even be willing to give you that space yet. And then all of a sudden you're in a position where you have to defend it or you have to explain it or justify it rather than just being like, makes me feel good and makes me feel seen as a human and as an individual rather than who you perceive me to be based on your own expectations or based on how I look or whatever it is, right? And to that I just say, well, why wouldn't that at least be worth giving it a shot if you know that the other person feels acknowledged in you putting in a little bit of effort to recognize that language has power and language has effect on the people that hear you speak it.
In the simplest form for people to understand, whenever I hear some pushback, I say, do you know how mad people get when Starbucks spells their name wrong on their coffee cup? Like, let's just break it down to the simplest form of respect in language. Somehow that is so offensive. It's such an easy name, or I just told you. That's true. And conversely, we feel so bad when we don't remember someone's name they just told us at a party. Why? Because we know that language matters. We know that calling them what they are matters. So anytime people push back on, well, what does it matter kind of argument, I'm like, well, actually, I bet I could. It's like a jab. It's like death by 1,000 pokes,
Yeah, to some people
I bet I
is.
could jab you right now because, just getting your name wrong, pronouncing it wrong, it's offensive. It's So
it is also something we all have to learn, right?
Yes.
So that's totally fair. And I never get mad if somebody misgenders me or if they mispronounce my name. I have a complicated name. But it's more the effort that counts, right? It's the willingness to acknowledge that we shouldn't hurt somebody out of ignorance or out of persistence of our own comfort.
Right. Or disregard, just complete disregard. There are people who want to disregard the importance of those
It's true.
niceties and respect. Okay. So many things to unpack and think about. So you would say then your personal obstacle was living straight, living as a straight woman. That's how you would define your personal obstacle that you've kind of been through and kind of can reflect back on and give other people advice on now?
That was definitely the hardest part of my life. It ended with that scary moment of sort of coming out to myself. I always say, like, coming out to anybody around me was secondary to, like, that moment I talked about where that house of cards kind of collapsed. And yeah, there was definitely a moment where I had to look myself in the mirror and ask myself where I was kind of confronted with all of my own homophobia that had kept me very boxed in my own my own identity. There was definitely a moment where all of that finally bubbled to the surface because it had been subconscious all my life, which is why I was living in straight relationships and in the straight identity. And I used to be really feminine presenting. Like, I had bleach blonde hair down to here, and I would wear high heels and makeup every day to school. Also because I think almost I was overcompensating for certain aspects of myself that I had learned to suppress really, really young. We're not talking like 16 first love. We're talking like 11-year-old girl sort of being taught what it means to be a girl. And, my parents now recognizing that we kind of raised you to be straight, which I can't blame them for, because for them it was like the way that they understood how to keep me safe and adapted to society and society's expectations. Once that fell away, that was not easy. It was scary because I myself had prejudice inside of me. But after that, my life has never been as hard or as confusing or as shameful or as dark as the period leading up to that, because the period leading up to that was, you know, I lived kind of separated from a large part of myself, and that was so confusing to me. I mean, like, we're talking like 16 to 22, just 6 years of my entire life. I mean, if you count like school crushes or something, maybe like 15 to 22. And I can't even begin to describe the depth of that struggle, you know, starting with looking around you and seeing all of your friends and your pupils that are making experiences that are, you know, all consuming emotionally to them. And, you know, none of that time in somebody's life is easy, you know, like, no matter who you are, right? But if you're in that phase where you just want to belong, you just want to, you know, be accepted, but you just find yourself falling short again and again. And like, for me, it was like I had this secret where I recognized that it wasn't just, I'm not as cool as the others, or I'm not as smart as the others, or I'm not as beautiful as the others. It was like, I feel like my humanity is broken. I feel like I don't function as a human because I'm not feeling the emotions that everybody around me is feeling. I'm not, you know, that mixed on top of experiences that are so painful that you can't explain to yourself, where you just feel like, maybe I'm just broken. And also on top of that, maybe I will never get to make these beautiful experiences of love that I'm starting to see my pupils, you know, at least grasp at in their life. And because I didn't have any answers to that, it was almost like it was easier to just abandon that thought for myself altogether. There was definitely a period in my life where I just thought, maybe you'll never get to have that in your life. So sometimes people say to me, Sophie, that's so brave of you. Like, you moved across the globe on your own, not knowing a single soul. To me, I was like, I was just running towards something that felt like freedom to me, even though I had no clue what it would look like. And let me tell you, I was definitely surprised. But coming from that position where, like, explaining to people what that looked like, and I'm sorry if this is, you know, dark to kind of try to explain to somebody, but that's the truth of it. And coming out of it has filled my life with stuff that nobody can ever take away. And it has made me recognize people for who they are as humans, because experiencing something like that really shows you your humanity at your core. It shows you your core desires, what it means to be a human, trying to fit in, trying to be loved by the people around you, you know?
Yes. Yes to all of that. Thank you for being so vulnerable and really finding the words. You are doing a phenomenal job of finding the words of what, you know, we hear and we read from a collection of experiences.
Yeah.
But I can picture and feel the emptiness and that kind of search. So thank goodness you've found the Technicolor on the other side in New York City. So all of this has had to really position you in a beautiful place for your business and the work that you do. And I am sure you are pulling that humanity out of every person you photograph. Is that how you feel on your shoots? Is that how people leave you? They feel so seen and also captured?
They tell me that, definitely. I think it is a foundation to how I approach it, because I think the experiences in my life have given me access to finding that humanity and those human desires in the people around me, and it kind of allows me to sort of like circumnavigate a lot of like expectations or boxed in thinking, or you know, we were talking about like politeness, for example. Sometimes rather acknowledging that maybe asking a clumsy question in order to understand somebody or to know how to navigate being in the presence of another person, it can be so much more valuable to that person than just being too rigid in the way that we interact with each other.
Like standoffish
Or just like too intimidated and just making assumptions about another person's limits and boundaries or comfort zones, and just kind of treating people more based on like what we've been taught to assume about people rather than acknowledging the person in front of you and learning how to create space that can then allow this person to like bridge that gap between you two, whether you're meeting for the first time or not. And that's kind of how I try to do it in my photography, is understanding that if you're in front of a camera, that's pretty vulnerable position, because it kind of gives this instinct of like, oh no, I'm being looked at. What if I'm being singled out? What if I'm being judged? And a camera to me sometimes, like, I try to picture like it represents like all of these eyes on you, right? It's intimidating. It makes you very vulnerable. But then having somebody behind the camera that can kind of show you, you don't really need to be anything more than who you already are in order for that to be enough. And then magically in the same moment capturing that exact thing, that exact interaction, and then having a document of it of some sorts. Like that has always felt so precious to me, even when I was a little kid, or I only now know how to put it into words, but that's how I feel with the people that I photograph. And whether it's somebody from my own community or somebody that has been marginalized in any other way in society, I find that specifically with those people, I know what it can take away from a person to not be given the space to know that who they are, and the things that maybe do make them different from other people is okay. You know, what we just talked about, I clearly know how painful that can be, but I think on the flip side to it, the amazing thing that it has given me in my life is that I now understand what some people need in order to not feel like that anymore, because I had to give myself that for a lot of like healing from my experiences, and I didn't do it alone, you know. Like I have had amazing people supporting me, like professionally and just in my community, but now I get to do that for other people as well, whether it's just through my profession or in like personal life, but I think it translates in what I do in photography.
And I appreciate you mentioning the people who did support you. It's so important to the process to have someone to start building your community one person at a time, because in some revelations that we have in life, they're all varied. You can lose everybody. You can lose everything you knew. And some experiences are way more extreme than others. And so it's good to start building one person at a time to get your support network back up. And you mentioned earlier you have a therapist here in Charlotte even. And so therapy is a big thing for She Dreams in Color. Our foundation funds therapy for marginalized women, because sometimes a therapist is the only person you have when you're starting over, when you're venturing into uncharted territory, and it can be transformational, even if they're one part of your team. Have you found therapy to be an important part of your journey, or just a part of your day-to-day? It's not just for the big things. It can also just be for the, the day-to-day, let me recalibrate my mindset.
Therapy completely changed my life. I actually started going to therapy when I was probably like 18. So when I was still like in that pit of what we talked about, was the first moment in my life where like, I was already 2 years into being in straight relationships and completely what's the term, like at my wit's end. It just very, very lost. And I felt like I couldn't talk to my parents about it, because like what teenager wants to talk to their parents about that?
No matter how good your parents are.
No matter how amazing they are.
Right.
And my friends were, making their own experiences that I was at most jealous of. So I felt like, that would be even more embarrassing to admit that I felt like I was completely different from all of them. I had tried talking to a gynecologist about it once, actually, which was a bad idea. Medical professionals are not always qualified to deal with emotional trauma as well. And so then I started seeing a therapist in Berlin for 2 years without telling anybody about it. I paid for it all myself. I got a second job. And that definitely was shame. That was kind of keeping me so secretive about it.
Shame for therapy or shame for the issue or shame for both?
Shame for feeling like I didn't function right. Shame for being in that situation in the first place and not knowing what to do about it, not being able to fix myself.
And when you hire someone, a professional to help you, it's official. You need help.
It was the last straw,
right.
But ultimately, at that moment in my life, it was still like, I'll go to therapy because I know I can fix myself. Mm-hmm. Very quickly turned into me acknowledging for the first time in the presence of somebody that, I didn't need to be scared of the consequences of saying things out loud, of what I was experiencing. And that changed everything for me.
And thank goodness you had a therapist aligned with your philosophies, because everyone doesn't have that experience. They have a therapist that is not on the same page and maybe pushing them in that same social paradigm they're running from. And I think it's really important to say that every therapist is not your therapist.
No.
No. It should feel good. Your therapist should feel good. And if it doesn't, keep looking, because there is someone more aligned with what feels at ease in your heart.
Yeah. And those 2 years of therapy definitely were not easy, because at that point I had experienced a lot of sexual trauma, and that therapist, just kind of got me to that point where I at least was able to acknowledge it and look at it and kind of decipher what parts of that, I should no longer or didn't need to cling on to or blame myself for. I didn't figure out I was gay during those 2 years of therapy, though. That was more just, somebody please help me. But now I have a queer therapist now, and she lives here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her wife is actually also a therapist. And that, again, changed my entire life. I had a session with her last week, and I have not been the same person since last week, but since I started going to her in general, and because with her, I don't need to explain myself, because she gets it, because I can see myself in her, but she's in a position where she knows how to help me take 2 steps back to gain perspective on where I currently am. And that, I think, for somebody like me, only a queer therapist is fully able to do. So yeah, you're right. Not everybody is going to be exactly what will have the most impact on you, I think.
I've seen a combination of a few things. You need a therapist who is the opposite of what you might be, and then you need a therapist who's on the same journey that you're on, and sometimes you just swing back and forth, and maybe that's the parental structure that we, the yin and the yang that we need. And I appreciate you sharing your therapy story, because the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more comfortable people are of making it official and getting the therapist. There is no shame in that. And sometimes it really is the fastest way to a solution. It's unbelievable, the progress. As you said, a week of change, an evolution of a person through a session. Sometimes you just have those moments. So stop sitting in the turmoil and find that catalyst that can really get you to the next level with knowledge. It would have been detrimental for you to take advice from 16-year-olds.
Yes.
I mean, we've all been there. We're just all, walking off the edge of a cliff together. So I really value your experience and journey, and how it's painting a picture for me of how you became a photographer, and then how you chose your calling to be specifically representing social minorities. Because imagine what your walls as a teenager would have been if you were you back then.
Imagine that.
It could have been just a kaleidoscope of images and people and human beings that you could say, I see myself in this. And maybe the journey would have been a lot less rocky and a lot shorter.
Maybe.
So who have you worked with in your field that has really opened you up to even more? Because I feel as if sometimes I do these interviews just for myself. I just want to learn more for myself. And Alexis, we want to be exposed to incredible humans such as yourself to learn more. And we'll quote you for the next 3-4 months. Sophie said, we do that all the time with every guest. Sophie said we make everybody's quotes bumper stickers, and we're like, to guide us through our own journeys, because no matter how old you are, no matter how much you've been through, no matter how much therapy, it's a lesson every day, and it's a journey every day, and we're learning new things and figuring out new things. But so who that you've worked with has really just opened a whole world to you that you're like, yeah, this is why I'm doing it?
There's been so many. I feel like, how much time do we have?
Fair enough. You don't want to pull anyone out, but is there a particular space that you were welcomed into with someone and you were like, wow, I'm honored to be here and to capture this?
I, over the last 2 years, have been doing this photo project with the Sage Center, which I don't know if anybody listening has heard of them, but they are a nationwide organization for LGBTQ elderlies. Okay. They were founded in the 70s by people from the community, for people in the community, because especially, 2 generations ago, being queer or being transgender meant you were mostly completely cut off from any social structures like healthcare or home care or elderly care, whatever it is, housing. And so this organization kind of established itself and is now nationwide, completely integrated into all of the social networks, which is amazing. And I got to go to one of their annual galas this past year, it was last year, and seeing the head of the AIDS Foundation there giving speeches, and all of these great organizations kind of interlinked kind of in this web of social help. But that project was life-changing to me because I didn't realize I didn't have any representation from my own community from 2 generations ago in my life. And I kind of found them by accident, didn't realize that center existed, and kind of stumbled in and had my first interaction with a lesbian grandma that happened to have the same hair as me or something. And I was like, I didn't realize that was interactions that I had been missing from my life up until that point. And then I, got in contact with them and started volunteering with them. And they have this friendly visitor program where you get assigned a buddy and you spend 2 hours a week with them so that they have social interaction, because a lot of them don't have a large network. They don't have family connections and stuff, and the organization does amazing things. But then we also did a photo project with them, and so I got to photograph a lot of them, some of them even with their partners that they had been for 40 years and 40, 60, what am I talking about, really long time. And imagine being a gay couple in the 60s or in the 50s even, and photographing them was I would meet a lesbian grandma and I would look at her and I would realize that I've never had an interaction with a single human from 2 generations prior to me where I didn't have to explain my sexual identity or my gender identity to somebody. And that moment single-handedly changed my life because I didn't realize I needed that experience until I got it. And I was, 25, 26 when I first got that in my life. So now I have, since my whole family's in Germany, I would say I have all of these adopted grandmas and grandpas here, which they're some of the strongest people I've ever met. And it's crazy because actually a lot of them, I met them and I would have guessed them my grandfather's, my grandmother's age, and turns out they were just a little bit older than my parents, which is kind of shocking to realize because having lived a life that a lot of them have lived, ages you in a way that is almost unimaginable to a lot of people in this society at large. So getting to work with that organization that does so much for these people is, I think, I find so much purpose in all of the work I do, but that work I feel like is something that I might have to keep doing until I join them as an elderly myself.
Well, and you mentioned, Sophie, about your secret growing up, the secret that you had. And that was the first thing I thought of, is how detrimental it is to our physical health when we are not fully representing outwardly. Anyone that has had it feels like it's growing inside of you and depleting you. So when you mentioned that earlier, that was my first thought of how dangerous it can be to not live fully outward. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and you also saw that, because there's value in being free, in expressing how you are openly and safely, and the stress of just existing and that being okay.
I'm glad you recognize that.
It matters. It matters when we can create, safe spaces is also something people can be so hateful about, but it matters. When we are in a safe space, it really feels light. And that lightness is good for our soul. It's good for us.
Yes.
I worked with, when President Obama signed the Gay Marriage Act, I worked with a lesbian couple here in North Carolina. They're very well known. I'll make sure that you get their link.
Okay.
Lenny and Pearl. And Lenny and Pearl, I went to their house to put them on CNBC or MSNBC to talk about President Obama's legislation. And the same... Like, wait, what? They are elderly women. They've been together forever. I went into their home. I spent several hours with them. They were delightful. And just seeing something I had not seen, but then you immediately go back to the life they must have led. And that's where I talk about the bravery. How brave they must have been just to be. It's the least I can do with my youth and my access and my availability and my voice and my energy, right? It's the least I can do to perpetuate the work that they've done.
It definitely creates this undescribable solidarity amongst people that have all at one point in their life hit a point where it was either continue to cater to everybody around you, or completely set yourself apart and distance yourself and cut yourself off from sometimes even the people that you're closest to, in order to no longer abandon yourself. Having made an experience like that, which most people in the queer community and trans community have, I think it shapes humans that it's so worth listening to. It's so worth hearing about their experiences. It's so worth understanding what that teaches us about who we are as humans. There's no better way I can describe that, but I see it in everybody that I meet from the community. And I think that goes beyond just the LGBTQIA plus community as well. Like, talk to people with disabilities, listen to people with different skin conditions, or, marginalized people in any way, shape, or form, because that kind of pain, that kind of struggle is the soil to some of the most valuable lessons that we can learn within our current society, and where we should be going with the next generation that we're raising, right?
I mean, ultimately, it seems like our journey is just to openly love ourselves. And some people have more outwardly experiences to fight, and some people have more inwardly experiences, and some people have both, where they have to fight the inside and then they have to fight the outside, and then hopefully they come full circle. Sophie, is there anything else you think is valuable? If you had to choose one thing, 'cause I will keep going, I will keep talking. If you had to choose one thing to leave our audience with, we believe, I'm creating what I needed when I was 16, when I was 35. I'm creating what I needed then. when I was at a place of looking around and not having anything or anybody to guide me. Is there a thing that you think is important to leave a woman in that place, in that journey, whatever the struggle is, whatever the obstacle is, as we wrap up today?
Well, I think since I'm on here as a photographer, what I want to create is this space where people that have been holding back or held back from visually taking up space to recognize that there is space for each and every single one of them. There is a place where they can step into their own power visually as well and walk away with the knowledge that who they are is worthy to be seen. You know, I'm a visual creator. Obviously, their voices matter so much, but from my perspective, showing up and no longer hiding is just as important. We're such a visual society. We consume so much on the day-to-day, and making the experience that who we show up as is worthy of being seen and being portrayed in a certain light and being like guided through that as well, which is what I do for a living, right? I provide that space. That is my ultimate dream in life, is to have that space for people with the tool belt that I've acquired somehow in my life, you know, through what I'm passionate about, which is photography. That experience it. Give yourself that experience. I highly recommend it. If you don't know how to do that, then come find me.
Yes.
I'll show you.
And you before we started the interview, you were telling me about a good friend who lives here in Charlotte,
Yes.
a model.
Yeah.
Tell our audience about that. I want to make sure we get it in this
Yes.
series.
And she has to come on the show, which I'm sure she would love to. One of my really close friends has a skin condition, which is a really rare skin condition that gives her this really unique look. And she had a dream of being a model. Her name is Jay Zagari. I'm sure she wouldn't mind me saying.
Oh,
her
no,
name.
please.
And
she's here in
everybody go
Charlotte.
follow her. Yes, she
Yes.
lives here in Charlotte. She had a dream of being a model. There was not a single model in the industry that had her skin condition, and it really is a really unique look. Like, most people have never seen somebody like her before, and she decided that if there was no space for her, she would create the space. And she came to New York City, and I was one of the first photographers to photograph her. And her images that we took that day, she came with her little sister, it was so cute, went viral on the internet, and she has since then completely taken off and really created her own representation. And I even have people with her skin condition messaging me because they're like, I have never seen somebody with my skin condition on the cover of Glamour UK. So she probably has a way more insane story than I do to tell.
I don't know. We can't start
You're like, I don't
measuring
know.
value right now.
No, that
My
we can't compare,
goodness,
but
Sophie, but just imagine, you know, I truly believe everybody is in the place for the reason, for bigger than we could ever understand. You went through what you went through, and I never want to say that we have to go through bad things to be who we are. I really dislike that. I would rather just be who I am without all my trauma, but I will take it and I will turn it into being this person. And so everything that you went through created this person who could create that comfort for her to say, I know what I want to do. Wait, here's someone else who says what I'm thinking is possible. And then you have 2, and then there's 3, and then there's 4. And it's similar to what you found when you moved to New York. You weren't the only one. You've heard and saw other people, and now there's 5, and now there's 6, and now there's a community. And now we're able to reach so many more people with social media and videos and images, and just what a beautiful gift you are to the world. And I'll say that. We've made it so far. I just want to say that you are allowing so many other people to have permission to identify however they are, whatever they are. And what a great gift you are giving to so many people. The She Dreams in Color Foundation has a mission to provide funding for therapy services for marginalized women. And one way we do that is through selling merchandise. We have t-shirts like this, we have stickers, we have notebooks, all kinds of things. You can find all of them on our website at sunshinemedianetwork.com. This particular shirt, a work of art, we believe women are a work of art, was designed by Charlotte graphic designer Dominique Prescott. Her business is called DAPS Designs. And you can see it's a beautiful representation of how we envision women, a work of art, a work in progress, perfectly imperfect.